Italian American Stories podcast. It's just me. Mom's not, she's okay with the audio, but when it comes to the video, she's like, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Well, I've been listening, and she does great. You guys are a great duo on this podcast, and that's actually what like lured me in. I'm like, this is a really interesting podcast. I wasn't sure, because you guys were going like really in depth on like different topics and things. I was like, this is actually very interesting. So,
Oh, thank
kudos
you.
to you. This is a really excellent podcast, and I feel like your trajectory is like exploding this week from last week because I've been following you.
Yeah, it's all of a sudden I got about 4 different emails asking for interviews within like 3 days. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm
The
not
algorithm.
complaining though.
Yeah, the algorithm serving you on Facebook because you come up often and you're just putting everything together really beautifully. And so kudos to you guys, and well, especially to you. I know mom's like part of she comes in because you set it up, right?
Yes, exactly. She's like,
Right.
I'll come in and have a cup of coffee and hang out. So it works out great. So
Yeah.
thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, with it being the Italian American Stories podcast, I always like to ask my guests to share some type of an Italian American story. It could be family, you, both, whatever you want. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's like interesting because what is my Italian American story, and it's really just who I am. And I think I shared with you, I started a blog a really long time ago called The Italian American Girl, and on that I put together a biography, and it's like you're always like, coming from an Italian American background. So I'm first generation Italian American. My parents are from Italy, from a region called Calabria, Reggio
okay.
Calabria. And so it's the southernmost tip of the boot in Italy. And my parents are the only like family members that actually came to America and stayed here.
Wow.
My Yeah, very interesting because like, if you speak to a lot of Italian Americans, like you have a lot of family members who came over, immigrated to the United States, and it was like a family affair because everybody wanted to come here and like, build a new life here. So you usually came with like more family members than just like one or two people. But
Yeah.
yeah, so my dad came over here in the 50s, around 1956 on Columbus Day.
Oh,
Very
wow.
very pivotal, so Columbus Day. So we're recording here, I guess, it's September, but October is a very important month for Italian American history and heritage here in the United States as we celebrate it. So for me, coming up, October 11th is Columbus Day. I think of my father, and him kind of like making this inaugural move into the United States. So he came over in the 1956, and then my mom, he went back to Italy, married my mom. They both came back again in the 60s. So my mom, my father actually traveled on a ship to LSI, like, when it was a little bit more modernized. Obviously, he wasn't like that wave of immigration like you see in like the archives and things,
Sure.
um, but my mom actually traveled on like, I always say it's like Pan Am, TWA, like the old school airlines. Like she came in the 60s, and so they made a life here, and it's myself, and I have other siblings. I'm the youngest of four, and you know i think I think that's like it's such a huge kind of like transition because we grew up very Italian.
Sure.
And even though like someone says like, are you Italian? I'm American of Italian heritage. And but I went to school speaking Italian. I went to elementary school speaking Italian and dialect. So so it's like funny because I'm very assimilated, I'm very American, I fit in, and like there's no, you can't like really tell anything. But when I'm home and in the trenches with my family, we're very much Italian, Calabrese, like
Yeah.
you kind of like fall into that character of your life.
Almost
So
have
that's
like
like
two worlds there a little bit.
that's exactly it. It's like splitting your brain a little bit because when you're little and you're in elementary school, you're learning like the American language. You're kind of like learning the culture of like what we do in America. So yeah, there was a lot of differences obviously to how we grew up, and like even lunch, I know this is a funny story. Like a lot of Italian American kids always tell this story about their lunch
Yeah.
because my lunch would, I in elementary school, like fourth grade, third, fourth grade, I'd be in the lunchroom. So some other kids having peanut butter and jelly, and like I'm having marinated eggplant on like, a very like artisanal bread with like parmesan, like cut and just very like Italian lovely lunch. And
Right.
kids would be like, ew, what are you eating? Like, why do those things look all squiggly? But it was like eggplant, like marinated eggplant, which is like, you know, who doesn't want marinated eggplant? It's like my
It-
favorite thing. So stuff like that is like, we look back and we tell stories about that because it's always funny. Like my friends growing up, my father made wine at home, so we grew up every October, it's winemaking time. So anyone
nice.
who knows me, my friends that I grew up with, like they always tell stories like, remember when your dad came up from the basement with the cellar and he had like a bottle of wine? This is when Heinz, I don't know if you remember this, but Heinz ketchup used to be a glass bottle, not
Yeah.
plastic. Okay. So Italians, like we reuse jars for everything and bottles. And so one of the bottles was a Heinz ketchup bottle. And so
Yeah.
my dad, like after we made the wine, like there's 50,000 bottles of wine in the basement. And one of them just happened to be the Heinz glass. And I'll never forget, like one of our good friends would always be like, remember when your dad came up from the cellar and he had a Heinz glass bottle with wine and we all tried it? I'm like, yeah. And that
Yeah.
that was my life. Very like that's how we are. That's how we came up. And I don't think there's no end story, like it's like how
Sure.
many stories can you tell about being Italian or Italian American? I mean, I think it's endless, and I find myself constantly kind of like even with my siblings, I'm like, remember that time that, whatever it is, it's like there's a whole kind of like marriage of Italian and American culture that happens, especially like from my perspective, because I went to college in America. I've always worked for very big companies, Fortune 500 companies. I've had like a, very successful career. But, when I come home and when I'm like with my mother, or if I'm like, in the garden with her, or when my father was alive, it was, you come back down to earth and you're very much like put back in the chair and the seat of being like your authentic Italian self.
Sure.
So the Italian American story just like it doesn't go away, and it's not like an archive story, because
Yeah.
like many other Italian Americans, like, you know, it's interesting because from an educational perspective, like when you look at assimilation and how Italian Americans were perceived or Italians were perceived when they came to America, and how we live as the newer generations, let's say here, we're very much assimilated. We're very much we're not like stand out as much as we were because
Yeah.
you're threaded into society now. We're not like, you wouldn't look at me and be like, oh my God, you're Italian.
Yeah.
You just it's a whole different kind of integration, I would say, like at this point, but very, very interesting, how this is now.
It is. And you look at our parents, like you were saying, their assimilation was very different. It was a little bit, even my mom, who was second generation, third generation, can't remember, even for her, she had a different, she was
Yeah,
still, I guess, in the cultural eyes, more Italian than me in a
right.
sense, if that makes sense. But I
Yeah,
think you're right. Like I always look at it as still being grounded in our ancestry in a way. We can go out and I'm a teacher, so I teach kids all day, but I still find even sometimes when I'm teaching, I'm like, oh, that was a very Italian thing that I just said to those kids, and I think we're always kind of grounded in that ancestry.
yeah, yeah. And you can't I was chatting with someone else just about like even your day to day, like you're saying, like you're at work, like even me, when it has to do with like assessing something, or how you approach something, or how you speak to someone else. And that is actually all based, how I grew up, and that's my values around being Italian, and
Yeah.
that could mean, I don't want to say too much like about religion, but like religion, it plays a huge part in how, I mean, I'll speak for myself. It plays a part in how I, kind of work with people, or how I approach people, or how much empathy I have for a person, or how much you forgive someone, or how you kind of like do your day to day, or, there are so many of these elements that really kind of dictate, the true DNA of we are the product during our generation of like
Yeah.
what we were instilled with, even relationship wise, whether whatever kind of relationship you're in, and again, I'll speak for myself. I have more of a traditional background, even though I'm like very open-minded, but my background, because of how I grew up, is a little bit more traditional or conservative.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it doesn't mean I'm not liberal.
Yeah.
There's different parts to it. But it plays a huge role, in everything. And kind of like fast forwarding a little bit. So I think everyone could see probably like my title here.
Yeah.
Um, so I am the executive director for the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission. This is for the state of New Jersey, so I'm located in New Jersey.
Nice.
And this is where it plays an important part here, because I my career is in media marketing, broadcast television. I've been a TV producer for a long time. And so one of the parts that brought me here to what I'm doing with the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission was really about like preserving and like getting behind something that really um, you know takes into account the importance of the Italian American and Italian heritage. And so
Yeah.
and the mission of this organization called the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission, we work on developing curriculum, educational curriculum, and this is all curriculum, based around Italian history, Italian culture, and this is a curriculum that actually, gets put into the school system.
Oh, wow.
It's backed by the Department of Education. It is vetted through like high level professors, and our chairwoman emeritus, Dr. Gilda Roro, is she's like the most amazing scholar in our commission, just because she was the chairwoman, and she leads the curriculum committee. So the goal there is to really implement this, and so we're talking about other generations, like you and I are probably closer in generations, and then you have the generations below us who are not really, I mean, their idea of the Italian American culture or Italian culture is probably non-existent, or what they only see on social media,
Sure.
I would say,
I
because I see it and you see it, we're on social media, obviously, 'cause that's how we connected.
yeah.
So a lot of times your view and like what you're getting educated with, is not, it shouldn't always be TikTok or Snapchat, I mean,
Yeah.
there might be some good content here and there, like your content is great, because now you're taking real authentic stories and you're educating, and people are taking the time to listen, to say, oh, everybody's got a different story, and that's what
Yeah.
it's about, educating around the stories. And so my role with the commission as executive director is working to really take all of these pieces of education. We're working on an ambassador program, which takes a lot of our folks, and anyone who wants to really be an ambassador to the Italian culture, they take all of the learnings and all of the kind of content that we have, and they go out almost like a community outreach kind of structure, and
Yeah.
helping people to understand through film, through arts, through the actual educational curriculum, the content there, but really shedding a light on who we are,
Yeah.
where we come from.
Oh, I think that's beautiful. I mean, because coming from the education world, I teach fourth grade.
Oh
I
yeah.
started out the year teaching third grade and then had to switch to fourth grade. But I've taught up to sixth grade. The Italian history is not really there at all. I mean, and Colorado, we don't have as large of an Italian base as, New Jersey, New York, but it's not there. I mean, there's areas where kids could study it if they wanted, but it's not there. And I think that that's pretty neat because to me, so much of like what I do with the podcast is like you were saying with your organization is preserving, because I think if we can't preserve what came before us, like you said, these kids now will perceive our culture through social media. While there's some good stuff out there, there's some stuff that, you're kind of like, oh, well, we're more
Yeah.
than
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I have to tell you, I still think I'm pretty hip, I don't think like I've crossed over yet where I'm like, oh, I'm like the old Italian lady. I find
Yeah.
myself doing like weird old lady Italian things sometimes, but that's just like in the DNA. It just
It
happens.
is. Yeah. I think we probably did it when we were 12 and didn't realize it.
Right, right, right. But I still think I'm like I have my finger on the pulse, like I'm in all the circles. I do my best to kind of like keep myself connected to a lot of, anybody who's kind of like really talking about Italian American culture, history, archives, anything like that. But I do cringe a little. And I don't know if that's because it's me as a first generation. Um, I don't agree at times with a lot of things I see on social media about
Sure.
Italian American culture, which might be true. Like I have to kind of do this disclaimer to say that some of these things might be true that you do see. Like it might be an inflated narrative that you see about Italian Americans sometimes, but some things might be true. Like
Yeah.
there might be truth to some narratives, and that might be part of history, and that might be part of just like what went on during a certain time. But also we have to look at geography, for
Yeah.
instance. So in our part of the United States, right, the East Coast, especially tri-state area like New York, New Jersey, there's definitely a narrative, right? And there is a stereotype to what and who we are. And that
Sure.
might be based off of mainstream media. So mainstream media, again, this is where I feel comfortable talking about it because I am part of mainstream media. I've worked in, major networks my entire career. And there's a little bit of a hypocrisy that comes with it, right? And so now here I am. I feel like I've come to a moment where I feel like I have to put my voice forward. This is part of one of the major reasons why I was lucky enough to be accepted into the commission. They appointed me their executive director. I'm so grateful for that because it does give me a voice, a different type of voice now, where we can go and actually, I don't want to say you can't really change some of those mainstream narratives because they're just like
Yeah.
everywhere, and we know
They're
that media
ingrained in our society.
media media is like a monster, and it's hard to kind of like permeate those circles at times to say like, well, it's not always about an HBO hit series. Like it's also about this and this, like
Yeah.
there's so many beautiful aspects to the Italian American story, the immigrant story. And
Yes.
and that's the part that like breaks my heart a little because I think about my father coming over in the 50s. It wasn't easy for him. Like I'm all put together, and like I have like my life, and I could tell you all the highlights, the highlight reel of my life, and how great I went to a great school, I have a great job. But my father, it wasn't easy for my father. He
Yeah.
came over, it wasn't easy for my mom. They had to learn a language. My father traveled 10, 11 days on a ship to somewhere he had no idea about, had no money on him. He was here, he settled in Newark, New Jersey, which is like, a very big city on, in New Jersey, and it's like the hub for where most Italian Americans kind of came into from New York and kind of settled in Jersey.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Newark, and we had our very like foundational life in Newark. My father bought his first house there, all of that. But it wasn't easy. Like we didn't
No.
grow up rich. We didn't grow up like Bobby down the street or Sally. Like we weren't American off the bat. Like we it
Sure.
was a lot of learning and assimilating, and but my father worked like three jobs always. And I sound a little bit of a broken record because like a lot of times, even on my own podcast or on my blogs and stuff, I always talk about my father working multiple jobs because that's how he got ahead, and
Yeah.
that was his American dream. He believed in the American dream, he believed in he loved being here. He loved being able to make money. He loved being able to support his family, and that's what he did. His story is, coming here and making that money to then be able to support his family in Italy as well. Because
Yeah.
everybody in southern Italy, that's where most of the migration comes in from,
Yeah.
was not rich. It was historically poor. And if you go back to Italy now, which my family is still there, and my mom and my sister go back often, unless you work for the state, if you're a teacher, you're a cop, economically, it's still like not like here where you can just like go and work and be like, oh, let me go, make some
Yeah.
money or pick up a side gig or something. It's a different dynamic. Even though if you will look at social media now, right, you have everybody's like, I'm moving to Italy. I'm gonna live in Italy. Like it's the expat exodus. Okay. But there's a reason why the original Italians in southern Italy and Sicily all came over to the United States.
Yeah.
It's not an easy path. And Italy's like wonderful. It's beautiful. You have the best food there. People do live la dolce vita in a way where it's about your wellness. It's about,
Sure.
eating like the best food, the healthiest food, organic food. But it's not like a walk in the park for anyone there either, So
And especially if you grew up in America, going and moving to Southern Italy, and I've never been, but just from what I've heard, it's I don't want to say third world, but in a way, there's parts, the air conditioning, driving, traffic. That's things that we take advantage.
yeah.
We're kind of luxuries for us.
And that's exactly it. It's they're not like it's not America.
Yeah,
My father used to say like, America's here, meaning in Italy, because like, you have the best of everything there. But I mean, there are certain things like, southern Italy is known as like a more agricultural area. So
yeah,
that's part of the reason why it's not so developed. Like if you go to Milan or you go to Florence, you go to Rome, you're gonna be like, wow, this is beautiful and it's great, and the economy is moving like a little bit faster there, and it's a little bit more like efficient. Like here, it's more westernized, let's say.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's not what you're seeing on social media. Yes, geographically, when you look at the ocean, you look at like the Strait of Messina, you look at all the beautiful like things in Italy. Yes, those are real things you're seeing, and that's beautiful. But it's not, and I think all my cousins are, I'm still, close with all my cousins there. They would agree, it's as much as it's beautiful, it's still not the easiest.
Yeah,
So you can't always believe what you're seeing on social media when you compare the true Italian American, like the shift from like that journey, right? So here's
yeah,
my father coming over to America. There was a reason he came to
yeah.
America. If money was abundant and there was no lack of money, or he could provide for his family, he would have probably stayed in Italy. But that wasn't
Exactly.
the case. This was after World War II. This was after like, and nobody had anything. People had nothing. And if you go back to Italy, like I said, we go back often. The houses are all the same they were 100 years ago. There's modernizations and things like that, but it's a different world. It's
Yeah,
not what you uh it's hard to explain in like a brief conversation, but it's almost like I
yeah.
think other Italian Americans probably could like understand it, because if you've traveled back, like a lot of people are like, oh, I went back to my father's village or like my mom's village. Like these are the towns, but they refer to them as villages. You kind of understand this idea that it's like, it's very, there's a lot, there are many reasons why the Italian immigrated to America.
Especially the Southern Italians.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons there. But also, you mentioned the air conditioning. Italians actually think air conditioning is bad for you. There are
Yeah.
Italians who have air conditioning and it's no big deal. But there are Italian Americans who actually, I mean, Italians that believe that air conditioning is actually bad for you. It's from a wellness standpoint,
Sure.
including my mother, who's like, "Oh my God, turn it off! You're killing me!" Like that's her line about it.
That
But
would be a hard thing for me. It gets hot in Colorado. I'm sure New Jersey too. You guys might be a little bit more humid than we are, but oh my gosh, that would be really. I could do it, but it'd be hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, something you don't even think about here, right? Because
Yeah,
we're just so, like, used to this, like, lifestyle that we have here, but, yeah, I mean, if you travel anywhere in Europe, I mean, they have, like, those wall units,
yeah,
those are, like, those mounted, like, wall units for, like, air conditioning and heat and stuff like that.
yeah,
It's not what we have here, this, like, centralized, like, the way the houses are built,
yeah.
everything
Every
there.
room.
Right, right. Everything there is like built, it's either stucco or brick or you know what I mean? It's a whole different world. But yeah, it's interesting because and I'm so glad we connected now. As for us, what's really important, even with the Italian Heritage Commission in New Jersey, it's just really important to really emphasize the history, the culture, the stories. So your podcast is like labeled the Italian American Stories podcast. That's going to be the most important thing you put out because my story is like very different than someone who is very, like we have a common thread with another Italian American, but their story might be completely different. So you were saying you're like what? You're fourth generation, third, fourth generation?
Yeah, I'm fourth, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
my
and
great grandfather came over. So does that make me? I can never remember this. I can
your
never figure it
great
out.
yeah, so I guess that's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, probably
So I'm
4.
fourth. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and where in Italy is he from?
Basilicata region. So I have the Basilicata region, so Potenza, and then his another part came from Salerno. So
Oh, okay. So see,
yeah,
we might be related.
we could be. I mean, you never know.
When you go
Yeah.
when you go back to Italy, that's like the funniest thing because like my mother will introduce someone, like someone she grew up with. She's like, "Oh, this is so and so. Her cousin is our cousin, which is the blah blah blah." And I'm like, "So does that mean we're related?" She's like, "Not really, but they're cut like they call them like Gina, but
Yeah.
everybody's related somehow. It's our common DNA or common thread that keeps us all connected.
It does. Well, and then I really like that common thread idea because one thing I've noticed doing the research that I do, and I have so much is they all live different lives. Like I just did an episode on Margaret and Guido Rossi. They
Yep.
were ranchers in Oak Creek, Colorado, which is this tiny little mountain town. And then I've done, episodes on people who ran a peanut stand in the downtown Denver. But there's always that common thread that you can find, whether it's supporting their family or working really hard, or church, Catholic, something like that. You can always find that common thread. And I think those are the stories that are kind of missing because I could do Chef Boyardee all day, right? We all know that he was a real person. He created a business. He had his food sent for World War One soldiers, but his story will always be around. Where Margaret and Guido Rossi's story, it could be forgotten in 15 years, as their generations pass away.
Yeah, yeah, and this is part of like the education, right? This so even though you're putting a huge light on the stories, but the stories are historical, right? So this is
Hmm.
where we come in. I refer back to the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission because it's really about the stories with the historical context behind it. So I give you my story, which is me as a first generation. So I can give you that 1 to 2 part story of like, here's our journey. Here's where we settled. My father came here. We settled in Newark. So you're talking about the Rossies, and it's like that's even more fascinating, right? Because we came off the ship. Like I say, my father came off the ship and he stayed on the East Coast, right? So here we are, we're on the East Coast. My father did have a cousin who traveled out to California. And he, there's a part of the family, one of the cousins, he's out in California, which is also one of my goals, right? It's like I always wanted to figure out where they are because they didn't stay in touch. It's just history, right? It's like this
Yeah.
odd kind of thing. But so you're talking about this other couple who live closer to you in Colorado. I'm assuming closer to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but so my mind starts going and thinking like, what's the historical context there? So like, how did they get out to Colorado, or like what's their history from like, you know, are they more so like immigration story from the west or from the east, like because so many Italians came through California,
N- Yeah.
right? So it could be either direction, but it's they didn't they didn't get there just like by appearing, like
Right.
they travel like your family, like you somehow landed in Colorado. So this is part of American history, and
Exactly.
it is fascinating. Like we could go down this rabbit hole. We could talk for 2 hours on this podcast
Oh, for sure.
because here they are, right? So like the husband and wife, I'm assuming, right? Their husband and
Yeah.
wife. So they each have their own story of like their families, like their paternal and then their maternal, and then
Yeah.
husband has his side of it. Um, and it's just like, wow, now there's Italian American history. Not only like here's my story from the East Coast, but here you are. Here's your story. You're in Colorado, but there's also like an immigration into the center of the United States, right? There's
Yeah.
like Italian Americans across America. It's
Absolutely.
And this is why what you're doing is very important, and it ties into education. It ties into the context and the culture. So I bringing these stories to light, like I could listen, I was digging through your podcast episodes too, just to like, get an idea of more of the stories, because I told you we connected last week, and
Yeah.
I'm just like fascinated. There's so much to tell.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and it's like we could do multiple series just on different topics, not only just
Abs-
like, oh, introductory, here's Margaret Fontana, I'm part of the New Jersey Italian heritage culture, but it's exciting. It's actually exciting because this is why it's important that the younger generations, again, now I sound like I'm like 100 years old, but the younger, like even your kids that you teach, it's like they have no idea
no
that Miss
idea.
Stephanie, has this background. Miss Stephanie's produced, I say Miss Stephanie, I don't know, like in
No,
elementary
that's
school,
fine.
everybody like, but they have no idea, about what you're about. Maybe they don't fully know your background. Why is it so important to her to produce an Italian American Stories podcast? Because
Yeah.
she's connecting to who she is. It's like your identity.
Exactly.
But I love that you're in education, because it's, again, the common denominator for all of us is the education around the Italian culture. And
Yep.
and that looks different for everybody, even though, like the foundational pieces, like the benchmarks, like I could teach you about, you know, uh all of, if you look on our website, by the way, NewJerseyItalianHeritage.org, you can access all of our lessons, which give you, for kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, but different areas, whether it's history, whether it's arts, whether it's math. But I can give you those foundational pieces. But like you're saying, the Italian American stories actually surround that. Like, here's the foundation.
Yeah.
But the stories, like, why is that important to Margaret, who lives in New Jersey? Because maybe I want to teach my children or my neighbor or somebody about, here's the historical context around, why the Colosseum was built, or anything like that,
Yeah.
anything. Fascinating.
It is. It's so fascinating. And like you said, the rabbit hole, I started because genealogy. So I would be researching my own family. And as I'm looking at newspaper databases, I was like, wow, that's a really cool story about an Italian American. And I'd print the article out. And then one day I'm like, why do I have this file of Italian Americans that I'm not related to? And that's kind of how my podcast came to light. But there are and now I have like 3-inch binders. I probably have like 7 or 8 of them full of articles, because as I'm researching, I'm like, wow, that's got to be a fascinating story. That's got to be a fascinating story. And like you said, it's across the country. I've got Alaska to Florida, and you've got those states where and even Colorado is kind of thought of as are there Italians in Colorado? Like there's
Well,
those states that people are like Tennessee, Oklahoma, and there's Italians everywhere.
and so when you told me that, you're like, "Well, I'm in Colorado." And I was like, "That's interesting." Because and I gotta tell you, I think it's an East Coast thing too. We're a little arrogant, I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe I speak for myself, but, I don't wanna speak for everybody, but I think we're a little arrogant in the sense that we think the world revolves around like the East Coast, like New York, New Jersey, Italian American, like,
Sure,
and if you look at social media, it's pretty much dominated
it
by
is.
the Italian American in the tri-state area. It
Yeah.
is. So like Stephanie from Colorado talking about Italian American stories, I was like, is she from Jersey, but she moved out there? Like,
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm fourth generation Colorado too. So my family stopped off in New York where some of their family was, stayed 2 weeks and headed straight to Colorado. And my mom, she grew up in a very Italian neighborhood. It's very sparse now, but yeah, it's just, but to be fair to the tri-state area, that's where a huge amount of people stayed and didn't leave. So there is, I mean, the bulk of Italian, even probably still today, is up there. But
yeah.
yeah, it's, even like, so my father was born in Oklahoma. And when I think of Oklahoma, I still don't think Italian.
No,
But
no,
as
like
I'm
I
researching, I'm like, there's like a little Italy in Tulsa.
right, right. I mean, I think Oklahoma, like when I think of the Midwest and, like immigration and, you think back to like what we learned in school, which
Yeah.
is like the coal miners and like farmers out west. And, you know, I don't think about like someone who's closer in age with me and like, oh, they moved out to Oklahoma. Like it's kind of like a disconnect in a sense. And again, this goes back to education. So here's the layer of education about the stories and about like this is actually like American, I don't know if the right words like immigration, but like it's the American kind of like disbursement of
Yeah.
the Italian Americans like across the United States. Like Italian Americans, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like I would really love to like look at just the numbers of Italian Americans across the United States in different states and like
Yeah.
and I'm sure someone else has done this work already, but it's like, what does that look like? East Coast, West Coast, like I was saying, like they come into ships from Los Angeles, or did they only come in from New York and then they traveled across the United States and then like settled into different states? Um, you know, I think there's so much to uncover, and talk
There
about.
is.
It's like I said, it is a rabbit hole, but it is like fascinating cultural, you know, importance to us as Italian Americans to realize that um we are like a major foundation in the United States. We are
Yeah.
like a very large population in the United States. We have a lot of influence, but I think that's like also, in my opinion, a little lost. I think that folks kind of like, I don't want to say forget about their culture. So the work you're doing is important. The work I'm doing is important, and we're of the younger generation. I think it's our time and our duty to really talk about these things and talk about, maybe I don't know the full historical context of what that looked like, that migration around the United States looks like, or what the path looked like for every Italian who came over.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to bring all of that to light, and part of that, or the biggest part, is what I'm emphasizing today, is really the education, the work
Yeah.
around education, and the fact that you're a teacher. We work to actually work with teachers to give them the curriculum, to say, Stephanie, here's a full curriculum for third grade around math, science, and whatever, wherever, history. Here are the pieces, and we'd like to give this to you free.
Yeah.
It goes into your curriculum, and you have the choice to go to then your head of curriculum and say, hi, I'd really like to implement this into my school year. And that's how we're working to kind of like start at ground zero
I
with
think it's great.
doing that. and
I'm
and it's
actually going to look at your website and
that's
see what I
great.
can implement because it's
Yeah.
it's hard when it's not out there to then create as a teacher to create your own curriculum. I mean, I've been in teaching positions where you are just creating and creating and
Yeah,
creating. And
yeah,
so I think that's great. And I think our generation, like you were saying, we're kind of that bridge between the generation before us, so our parents, and I think the generation that's coming up after us, because we can still dabble in the social media. We can do a video podcast. We can, I could do a TikTok all day, but we still have that relation and that connection to that older generation,
right.
if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
I think I can write cursive, I can drive a shift stick, where like that connects me to that older generation, where this younger generation, I don't know if they'd know what to do if they got in a car with
yeah.
a shift stick.
No,
And
you're
it's kind of
right.
the same thing with this media and our Italian American stories, where it's sort of that generation that can bridge that gap, but we have to do it in a way that's responsible and beneficial and educational too.
Right, right. And that's exactly it. Like I think you're right. You and I mean, we don't know each other's like exact ages, but we won't broadcast it either.
Right.
Um, right, is part of like the Italian woman's secret. You never reveal your true
You
age.
never
But
reveal your age.
no, no. I mean, my mother's still telling me she's 35. I mean, she's married, but
My
um,
students will ask me how old I am, and I'll either say 17 or 86.
so what am I closer to?
What
Right?
am I closer to? And they're like, what is wrong with her?
Yeah, but it's a true fact. I think you're right. We are. I think we are, and it's a little sad to say, but like we are, I think, the last generation connecting the old and possibly the newer generation.
I
Um,
agree.
and I don't know why. I would love for a historian, like if you have some other guest on, or if there's like a historian who comes on, or someone who has this a little bit more nailed down. I can't wait to hear it. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of like you're on a roll right now. A lot of people are coming to you because this is people want to talk about this. And when you do get that person, the expert or the scholar who knows the answer to all of this, I'd be curious to know why that is. Like
Yeah.
what is it about our generation, like our bucket, that's like connecting these pieces? Um, you know, and especially like someone like me who's first generation, and you who's a couple generations down, but just as important. So I do follow someone who's Italian. He's an Italian citizen, but he lives in America. I follow him on TikTok. I forget his exact screen name or handle at the moment, but he was talking about, and it's very relative to what we're talking about. He was saying how Italian Americans have more nationality, like more affinity and love for being Italian than actual Italians.
Yeah. I've
Because
heard that too.
yeah, like and I believe that. They're like he was saying, Italian Americans are the ones coming back and investing in Italy, they either take trips or like they'll buy like one of these old renovation kind of projects, like because Italians in Italy are not having children, that's
Hmm.
like one of the things, you keep hearing about, and because of like this mass exodus of like the Italian immigration to the United States and even Australia and Argentina, like there's the Italians really like exodus out of Italy when things were really bad and everybody was like starving and dying, just from not having resources. So there's this now reversal
Yeah.
of Italian Americans have this like affinity and like love for the nationality, and like we're preserving the traditions, the culture, the education around it. Um, and I don't think it's a bad thing because like I said, I introduced myself at the beginning of this, and I said, I'm American first.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I'm patriotic. This was my father came here. This is the American dream. I am American, and I believe in what we are here in America, and like I fly my flag outside, and
Yep.
I'm behind all of it.
Me too.
So I think that's important to point out because it's there could be like a little bit of a lost translation on why we are kind of talking about these things, but there's so many interesting factors, and that being one of them, where there's the Italian Americans here in the United States are just like really working to kind of preserve the Italian, more so the Italian culture or the Italian like love affinity of the nationality and
Yeah.
who we are.
I
It
think that's interesting because even like you were talking about at the beginning of the at the beginning of the episode, how you grew up and different than your, I guess you could say American friends.
yeah,
And I'm with you. Like I'm American first. I love my country, but Italian comes right after that.
right.
But even for me being fourth generation, I could identify with you when you were talking about that. There was things in my household growing up that were different than my friends, and even being fourth generation. And I don't know if it's because our ancestors, like, we love that tradition in a sense,
Yeah.
and so it's passed on. Like I consider myself raised very Italian. I mean, maybe not as much as probably you as being first generation, but I identify as that, even though I have other ethnicities in me. My father was part Scottish, but I was raised Italian. Like that's how I identify. And being fourth generation compared to first generation, I think maybe that's what's holding us on to that is, like even behind me, I have all the pictures of my
I love
family
that.
and everything. And I think it's almost ingrained in us. Maybe it's the family part. Maybe that's what's keeping it there, is
Right.
that family is important and the tradition that comes with that family is important. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting though.
Yeah. And I agree with you 200%. I think, our common denominator and our common thread, we have all of these like amazing, wonderful things about being like Italian. The Italian culture is like beautiful, wonderful. There's so many things about it that you're like, oh, wow. But to your point, what keeps us rooted, and I think a lot of other cultures, there are other cultures that
Sure.
we share kind of like love and affinity with these common things, but it's about family.
Hmm.
And sometimes not all family dynamics are great. Like let
Yeah.
I was listening to another podcast where someone else actually brought up the fact about like dysfunction in like it was a historical story actually, but it was about someone was focusing more about like the dysfunction within a family, but they happen to be Italian American, whatever. And I think these are all just like real human things. I think
Exactly.
no family, listen, I love my family. I am rooted in family. Sometimes I wonder when someone's like, I talk to my whoever and someone's like doesn't have someone to lean on and they don't have the support. And sometimes I think to myself, how do you not have that? Because I have
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and we congregate, we get together, growing up 5:30 on the dot, my father was home from his first job and we would all be expected. My mother would cook dinner. And listen, my mother was very like liberal feminist. She went to college, like she's not like this like, oh, stay in the house like old Italian lady. Like she was
Sure.
out there. And my father was very supportive of everything she wanted to do. So he didn't play that role of like being like typical like stay in the house, like none of that.
Yeah.
So we grew up though, like to your point about the family and like congregating and all that. 5:30, dinner's on the table. Everybody's at the table. It doesn't matter if you had baseball, softball, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. My father had his another job to run to. 5:30, everybody gets to the table and we would have dinner. And Sunday dinners, 1 o'clock, 1:30, that was our time. You know,
Yeah.
we and yeah, typically, yeah, it was pasta. Yeah, like it, but that's how we are rooted, and that's how we live now. Even my nieces and nephews, they're all like adults, but we are rooted in let's get together, let's have dinner, let's get together for coffee. Do we have pastries? Are we typical? Yes. When it
Yeah.
comes, yes, yeah. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. And again, like I said, other cultures who kind of share some cultures really share that same value, and you'll find that in like other European cultures, and that's great. But I think that's what's lacking. That's the part of like we've become so fast forward in society. We're so busy. You're trying to hustle. You're trying to make things happen. You have your career. You have your micro family. There's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
maintaining those traditional, I may seem like, very fast forward. I'm out in the mix. Like I am, but I am hardcore traditional. Like, and that's me. I'll keep it to myself or I'll share some of those stories. But I am traditional to the core, and I will not, what's the word? I'm not going to change that about myself because
Sure.
it's valuable and
It is.
and there's a lot of love inside of that. So
It is.
I
Yeah.
think that's where we that's where we're talking. That's you and I connecting on that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm with you there with the tradition part. Like I'm very busy. I'm social media and all of that kind of stuff. But at my core, I'm a traditional person as well. And I think, that could come from our family or being raised how we were. It's a fascinating topic. It really is. And I could have this conversation for
You and I,
hours.
like, I wish we were closer. We could just like go hang out and talk for
Oh my
hours because
gosh, we could have some coffee and
I know
absolutely. Well,
amazing.
we could do another episode too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I can't thank you enough. And yeah, let's again, I'm so excited for you. I think that you're doing amazing work, and we'll reciprocate on another discussion. And if there's more to come, because Italian Heritage Month is coming up in October. So if there's
Yeah.
some interesting things on our side, I'd love to chat with you again, and vice versa. But let's keep our conversation going, and I'm going to promote everything you're doing because you're doing amazing work, and
Thank you.
I'm happy and proud of you, and thank you for inviting me on today.
Oh, of course. And let's definitely do this again. It was fantastic. And for you, I'll put all of your stuff as well, promote yours. Do you want to plug any of your stuff right now?
Yeah, so I would say, the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission is the go-to resource for educating and implementing K through 12 curriculum surrounding Italian culture. And so I would invite everyone to go on our website and check it out. And if you are an educator or if you know an educator, the lessons are actually free. Nobody's really looking for anybody to put, nothing money towards anything because this is about education. So we offer up all of our resources. And, if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me. The email is on the commission website, but feel free to reach out to me personally, Margaret Fontana. And, I am on the website as well. So New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission. So it's njitalianheritage.org. And, I'm sure we'll add a comment underneath with the link to make it easy.
Yeah, definitely. I'll do that. I can plug some of your social media in there too. So
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
perfect.
awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. This was
All right.
so fun. I'm so happy that we chat.
Me too. And let's definitely do it again.
Okay. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.